Upon Nkrumah, good morning, welcome.
Morning, Daniel, and morning to Aniwa as well.
Great. So Enima is doing well. She says she's fine. Yeah, so let's go ahead into what we've heard this morning. Will there be an increase in VAT tomorrow?
Daniel, I'm surprised we're going back to this conversation. I was with Evans, I think, 2 nights ago, and I have said over and over again that those are things that really will be improper for me to speak to before the time. It's just tomorrow, so let's just hold on. The minister will do what he has to do. But I think throughout this week, you've had a conversation about the economy generally, about what needs to be done to cut out waste, increase revenue, ensure that revenue is directed towards the places that bring growth and jobs and the necessary social interventions. And those are generally, I think, helpful conversations. And if there are any specifics I can answer in those areas, I'll be happy to. But specific to what the minister is going to talk about on
that will not be possible.
No, it won't be possible.
All right, so let's talk about these revenue collection options. And seeing as we have very little time, in about a minute, tell us, what are the options that government is exploring?
No, I mean, generally, we believe, if you take, or if you go way back to 1957, we have always spoken highly of ourselves. There were people capable of managing our own affairs, doing this and doing that. And we always talk about go to America, there's this, go here, go that. So there's a big desire. You add to that our 2016 campaign promises, which were quite heavy, and the Ghanaian voter subscribed to. What it means is that generally you have a huge expenditure outlay that you have to meet to improve the quality of life of the Ghanaian. You have about 3 instruments to use. You either just go and borrow and come and do it, in which case your debt is growing, you have debt sustainability issues ahead, or you can choose to be more prudent with the little resource that you have. So you've got to bring in some expenditure controls, cut down the leakages, the corruption, and all the things that go with it. And then on the domestic resource mobilization side, which is like, the real big thing that you have to ensure that you are able to rake in as much as you can. Just a couple of days ago, I was talking to your colleagues on TV and making the point to them that if you look, for example, at how much of our GDP we are capturing as tax to GDP ratio is just about 16% in this country and needs to go up. So there's a lot of economic activity, the dividends of which are not coming to the state. Do you burden the same person with more to pay more tax, or do you find a way of broadening the tax base, widening the base, getting those who can afford to pay a bit more to pay a bit more? So it is generally within these instruments that you pick a combination that work for you. And I'm clear in my mind that those are the things that the minister will be outlining this year, next year, and the year ahead, so that we're able to, as part of this whole agenda of achieving what we want to achieve within a Ghana Beyond Aid framework, mobilize the resources and direct them where we want them to go.
In the spirit of prudence, as you mentioned, on Monday in our conversation, I'm sure you were listening, we had some opinion that some of the policies that were rolled out, specifically free SHS, was rolled out in a way that does not help. It's too expensive the way it's being run. It should have been more targeted. That would rather have helped us to save more and be prudent.
And again, I make the point that any exercise aimed at increasing prudence in government expenditure is a welcome exercise. Free SHS has been, a controversial policy, even from campaign days. There are people who have disagreed with it, people who think it should be rolled out in a different manner. As we stand now, with the mandate that the government has, it is to roll it out as we advertised, as is being advertised now, and to ensure that education quality is not compromised or the Ghanaian child is made worse off as a result of that policy. But I think the real point therein is that all of these things we're talking, if you talk of $1 million per constituency, that's like what, 4.7 million Ghana cedis per constituency.
Yeah, 4.7 million.
Are you going to borrow that and use it for that purpose? If you talk of, let's say, one village, one dam, which has started in some parts of the northern parts of the country, again, it's going to cost you money. So it's not just free SHS. It is the entire agenda which requires money to fund. And you have to be efficient in how you raise that money without overburdening the same person. And I think that any way that we can do that is a welcome way that we should look to.
But do you think that free SHS, well, it has been implemented already. It was government's position to do it in that way.
The first year,
yes,
1.2.
It's now going to 1.3 billion or so this
will go
year.
Up in the years to come.
It will go up with more streams being added. Isn't that a bit of a burden on the taxpayer?
All of the things that government has to do, from item 1, wages and salaries, item 2, goods and services, item 3, non-fixed assets, they are all eventually a burden on the taxpayer.
Okay.
All of those items. It's a question of what are the priorities. Do you want to spend the money on some other matters, or you want to spend it in 2 main areas? Deepening growth, because it's growth that will bring you jobs and incomes at the end. So do you want to spend the money in initiatives that bring growth? And for those who you realize must be helped at the bottom through the social interventions that must help close the inequality gap in this country. We have a huge inequality gap in this country, Daniel. And the current administration is of the view that a combination of these two is what works. And that's where the money is.
The idea that came was that perhaps we can target it going forward. We can target it to the families or the parents who will not have the money to pay, but those who have shown by the level of school fees they paid at basic level that they can pay school fees at SHS. Would government consider that going forward?
It's early days yet. I mean, the policy is just a year and a few months old. It's early days yet. I think that all of those ideas are welcome. I do know that as we go along, there will be some reviews of how well it's doing, should something change, etc. At this stage, I think we're clear in our mind that this is where we want to go. But as we go on, if there's need to review, I don't see why we'll be obstinate and say, no, we won't review it. But at this stage, I think we're clear in our mind that this is where we want to spend the money. But the views are welcome views.
Okay, so in the future, government may be reviewing this.
When I say a review, I don't mean reconsider or change.
Okay.
I'm saying that all of these ideas as they come in when you've done a year and a half of a program are welcome. I know that somewhere down the line, obviously, like we do with all government programs, we'll take a look at it and see how well it is doing, what needs to be improved, what needs to be amended. If at that stage this becomes a dominant view, I don't see why we will be obstinate in saying no to it.
Okay. I'm looking at the MPP's manifesto, and your alternative to collecting more taxes at the time, one of which included an increase in tax compliance and broadening of the tax base as a result of formalization of the economy. It's been about 18 months since your government took office. With the example of Singapore, the tax base was broadened from 40% to 80% in some 6 months. It's been 18 months. Well, where have you gotten to?
So this year, as part of our tax compliance measures, for example, we introduced what we call the tax amnesty and then the TIN registration program. Okay, the numbers as I have seen them, I think if you work out even registering 4 new taxpayers a day multiplied by the number of people we have put into the exercise, the target, as I have seen, is to try and rope in about 1 million extra taxpayers who are not known to the tax database. I don't want to go too specific at the risk of taking things out of the sale of the minister. But that is an exercise, for example, that is aimed at broadening the tax base. You remember that we introduced other compliance methods, for example, when it comes to exemptions at the ports, people who were doing warehousing, but we're also ending up with debts, which shouldn't be the case, by the way, because you don't pay the taxes when you bring in the items. It's when you clear them from the warehouse. So still, how do you clear and still have debts? Tax audits, for example. So a lot of compliance work, even as was mentioned in the manifesto, have already started. I think the minister will speak to some of the results and what the remainder of the work will require or could even yield for us moving on to the end of the year.
Is this because what we'd like to know this morning is where we have gotten to. For instance, how wide is our tax net? From the 16%, have we stayed there from the beginning of last year?
No, I'm telling you that
currently
we are sitting at, but you see, when you roll out these, so currently we're sitting around 16%. But the thing about tax methods or revenue measures is that when you roll them out this year, so let's take the law we passed a few months ago, the fiscal electronic devices that are supposed to ensure that when you now go to any retail shop that qualifies for the tax threshold, it's not just a paper receipt, but an electronic receipt, which in real time synchronizes with the GRA database. You've passed the law. You now have to go through a procurement process to get, contractors signed up, machines deployed, training, servicing centers put in place. So when you roll in revenue measures, you don't start counting the revenues from January. It's going to take a period to roll in the measures and then the full dividend of the measures come in. So For example, this tax, this tin process I'm talking to you about, even if by the end of the year you've hit 1 million, you're not going to get 12 months revenue from all of those 1 million people. Maybe in the following year you could, because you're going to stagger and get those numbers before you get to the end of the year. So these measures are being rolled out this year.
But Singapore did it in 6 months. I'm talking about broadening the tax net generally. We saw that 40 to 80%, that was double.
Look at the population of Singapore. Look at how, coordinated their databases are. It's very different from ours. If we come somewhere to Ofuase, somewhere in the villages, and we say we are trying to bring all of these people who are doing little businesses into the tax net. I mean, look at National ID, for example. You see how we're rolling it out gradually. So, yes, I agree. We want it done like yesterday, but we've got to give it some good lead time for it to materialize. And these numbers are helping to broaden the tax base and to improve compliance as well. At the same time, so you have to control the expenditure. So that it doesn't balloon, the leakages are controlled, and then you can pull in a bit more and fund some of your other programs you're talking about.
Finally, before I bring to you some of the specific concerns that were raised by some interest groups yesterday, on the issue of revenue leakages, how would you generally evaluate the work that you've done? I'm seeing here the Auditor General's report. 2 customs officers allowed 103 million. Allowed some companies to take goods out of customs bonded warehouses without paying duties.
This
about
is exactly
103 million.
Those who are doing warehousing, and then you finish and they are debts. But you have employed people and you've put them at the warehouse gate, customs officers at the warehouse gate, who are supposed to ensure
who answer to government.
Yes, and so now you have to take steps whether you're going to prosecute some of these people or reprimand some of these people. Some of them have been put through the process. You recall customs officials who were interdicted, some people who were put up for prosecution, etc. So some of these exercises are going on. I think what we require is to continue with the toughness. But at the same time, the toughness, you have people complaining that, things are tight. Things have become too tight. Just on Sunday, I had a few colleagues visit me at home and say that, at first you could informally walk into the ports and do some ala and make some money and go. But now it's like all of those loopholes are being plugged. These are the things you do to tighten. And their point is that once you do that, then people who survive on the informal economy will struggle and complain. And my response to them is that while I understand that, you want to quickly do that, mop up the revenue, and rather use it for something sustainable.
But you see, on that major point, yesterday I had Francis Anum, let's call him Francois, from the Spare Parts Dealers Association, telling us that in spite of the paperless port system, you go to the port today, you still have to pay your way through. This morning, and one of these newspapers covered that we are losing 400 million cedis a month at Aflao and Elubo. So, I mean, these leakages are still there.
But what would we have been losing if we hadn't done this? We haven't said that since we did this, it's down to zero. But what would have been the situation if we hadn't done this? So you are gradually trying to close all of these loopholes and mop up that revenue that is due the state so that you can fund this agenda that we all agree is ambitious and we're all excited if it comes to pass. So it's a balancing act. And I think what government, tries to do is to walk that fine line between closing these loopholes, mopping up the revenue, and putting it where it ought to go.
Some say GRA as an organization itself is not being effective enough.
I've seen the history of GRA from IRS and customs that were put together. I think GRA today is a very improved version of our revenue agencies of the past. GRA today is, however, not perfect. We need to, for example, on the customs side, ensure that there's some more tightening. We need to, on the direct tax side, ensure that every person working in the formal sector earning an income is paying their due. On the indirect side, all those revenues that are slipping, people who are under declaring or keeping 2 sets of books, one for the taxman, one for their own accounts, we need to have systems that ensure that A, we know them, and B, we have a single channel that mops all of that.
But is it the case that we don't know them?
So GRA is not perfect, but has improved from what it was over the years. And we need to keep the whip up to get them to that point. Is it a case that we don't know them?
We don't know them.
No, so you identify them as you move along. You do a lot of these audits. We've done a lot of audits this year, for example, in telecoms and in mining, telecom and mining, for example. And, you discover some things, and then you go back and surcharge them for them to do.
What are some of the discoveries?
Well, again, I won't take the wind out of the sail of the boss, but the point I'm making is that you have to know that we do these things. You discover some of, and some were published. If you just do a little Google search, you'll find some of the oil companies in this country that were audited and were back taxed for them to. I see anyone going for a phone, back taxed. So we are doing these things, and that's how come. Last year we raised more revenue than the previous year, even though we cut taxes. You know that. It's because you are closing all of these, but it's still.
But we still didn't meet our revenue targets.
Well, of course, because we had very ambitious revenue targets. We wanted to raise revenues by, I think, about 30%.
Because it was said that your plans in the first place were too ambitious.
No, because on the revenue side, we thought that if we had a bit more compliance than we had projected, we could have met the revenue targets. Admittedly, we didn't meet the targets, but we still managed to do the most important thing, keep the fiscal anchor in check, bring it down from 9% to 6%. But you see, all of these numbers at the end of the day must translate into an improvement into the quality of life of the Ghanaian.
My next question.
That is why you want to quickly mop up the results and use it to deliver on your programs. So if, for example, you want to put kids through school, which now somebody is saying, or you are saying, oh, no, take some of the kids out, you want to quickly mop up the revenues and put it there. You want to put health insurance back on its feet where it's fully funded. Health service providers are being paid. The average person who goes to a hospital gets cared for in good time and is paid. The average hospital is completed on time. You need money to do all of these things. So well, the money is here, and we have to pull it out of the system, which is what we are going to talk about on Thursday.
Well, I'll just put this final comments to you. Since tomorrow is a review or sort of an evaluation of where we are so far. Yeah. Yesterday we had a small bit.
Oh, you had your own review on the show.
It wasn't me. It was this. Yes, we did actually here on the show. We had civil society. We had workers. We had traders.
And then your own in-house finance minister.
You listen to my question. So the points that they raised, really was that yes, even Mr. Kote said it. Asempa budget it turned into an Asem budget. The reduced taxes, they didn't feel it. And generally, even because of the difficulties of the banking sector, workers weren't able to get interest. Workers weren't able to get loans. It looks like things are not looking as well. The picture is not as bright as it was painted for us last year.
The numbers don't support that narrative. Every time I say that, when people make a narrative, check the numbers. And check the numbers and see whether the numbers support that narrative.
But Kojo, you just mentioned now that, yes, the numbers may look good, but it needs to translate into the quality of life. We need to feel it in our pockets.
Things are not good. I say that the measure of whether or not an economy is growing is your GDP. Everybody knows that. If the GDP moves up from 3.7 to 8.5, and it's not just in one area, it's in 11 out of 20 areas, that's more than half of your economic sectors. I will tell you that on the aggregate, you are seeing a growth in the economy. But at the same time, I say that when it comes to per capita, and closing the inequality gap, you have to do a lot more. We can see that, and I think it's something that everybody's focused on and working. It doesn't, however, mean that all the programs that were outlined have failed or have not worked, or that, because let's say one particular person says that his expectation in a particular area was not met, nothing has happened. No, we have to be able to nuance all of these things.
But this was not just this. No, you see, this was not just one person.
Yeah.
This is someone speaking on behalf of organized labor.
Yeah.
That's a huge chunk of our population. So this is an interest group speaking.
Labor will
in the first place, if I may, in the first place, and then we had other people around the table, persons who had direct tax decrease, direct tax cuts going to them, saying that in the end, because of exchange rates, for instance, the 1% special import levy on this one, the spare parts, was not felt. So I mean, these are legitimate concerns.
Again, as you do this analysis, you want to compare it to what would have happened. This one, I heard one of your intros. What would have happened if X had happened? You want to ask yourself, so what would have happened if these taxes were not taken off? You are saying that even after these taxes were taken off, people say that it's not 100% or it's not cushy yet, even after these taxes were taken off. Fancy a situation where you had a government that said that we don't believe these taxes should be taken off, and so we won't take them off. It will be worse off by now. So I think we have come some way. I agree, I admit that we need to go a lot further. We need to ensure that at the end of the day, per capita, the quality of life per capita moves up. And we'll concede that any day and work at it. But let us not pretend that absolutely nothing has happened. Listen, when President Akufo-Addo took over,
in 30 seconds,
and if you recall his first State of the Nation address, go and look through the list of the challenges that we had to deal with. Today, 1.5 years on, you've cleaned up a good chunk of it. You have an opportunity to spring forward. And I think that the conversation this week is a positive conversation. The nation appears to be coming together saying that, okay, we understand. We want you to do more, but don't kill us while you want to do that. And I think that's a fair point.
Okay, thank you very much, Kojo Oponkroma, Deputy Information Minister. Finally. VAT increase or no VAT increase?
Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, come to Parliament.
I'll be there at 5:50 a.m. Thank you very much. That was Kojo Oponkroma, Deputy Information Minister. Now, you see, we've been talking about money and how we can raise money for our country and how we need money to fund development. Over the past few years, how have we really fared as a country, as a continent, in fighting corruption, which is one of the main ways that we lose money? That is the conversation we are having today on Corruption Watch. How have we fared in the fight against corruption? Stay with us.
Ready? Of course I'm ready. Where do you want to